If you have devices or applications connecting and working with Azure IoT services, you will want to watch this new episode of the IoT Show. Remit is coming to tell you everything you need to know about an upcoming change of root certificates on the Azure IoT services. That's right now on the IoT Show. Hi, everyone. This is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host, and you're here to hear us talk about some important changes and updates about the certificate, migration. And for that, we have Remit here on the show. Remit, how are you?
Hi, Olivier. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm fantastic. Well, thanks for joining today. I think we're here to talk about a very important topic. Before we jump directly into it, you came to the show already in the past, but for those who don't know you, who's Remit? What are you doing at Microsoft?
Sure. My name is Ramit Malhotra. I am a product manager in the Azure IoT devices team. Specifically, I own the managed SDKs for Azure IoT. And as a side job, I do security stuff. And part of the security stuff is actually driving this very important migration for Azure IoT.
I like the way you say this security stuff. Like you are actually one of my security gurus around here. And so this is an important topic you're bringing up today, and it's something that we take seriously at Microsoft Security in general, in IoT even more. And we've been talking about an upcoming change in terms of certificate roots for some of our services. And so I would like for you to, before we jump into the details here, to reinforce how important is that topic and why should viewers stay on and watch till the end? How important is that for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough how important it is. It's going to impact every single device that connects to Azure IoT. Um, uh, it's something that the industry has potentially never faced before because roots are typically long-lived, and and the treatment meted out to this particular root has not been very kind in the last 3 years. So we're dealing with a problematic root that industry doesn't seem to like, and Azure IoT still has a dependency on it because devices are using it to interact with Azure. So we are going to migrate, and this migrate is going to impact every single device connecting to Azure IoT.
Okay, so I hope we have people's attention. So give us a little refresher here about what's
Perfect. I brought some slides with me, so I'm gonna use them to sort of talk through some stuff. And as you said, I'm going to start with a refresher just to get everybody up to speed and get everybody to remember what TLS is and how the internet works a little bit, and then we'll get right into the migration schedule and the critical changes that are about to begin.
Perfect. Let's go.
All right. So I'm going to talk through this loosely, this agenda. I'm going to start with something very basic, which is just a reminder of how TLS works. And basically the internet as it stands today employs various strategies to ensure that clients and services, which means that websites and the things that talk to websites, in most cases it's browsers, but in the case of Azure IoT, it could be any device really, with or without a browser or an operating system talking to some sort of web service or web endpoint. And what the internet does to ensure the security of this interaction is it employs this strategy of TLS, which uses certificates to ensure that the client understands and can safely interact with the website, knowing that it is indeed the website that it was intending to talk to. And how it does this is it employs this system of certificates. It's a hierarchical system where very simply you've got leaf certificates that are chained to a hierarchy of certificates all the way up to the root. So what happens is that you've got these CA providers or certificate authority providers that create these root certificates, and these root certificates are really secret and important. The entire trust establishing process on the internet really depends on the security and safety of these roots. So these roots are typically kept offline. You've got many CA providers across the world. You've got Global Sign, DigiCert. So you've got so many CA providers who create these roots, and then they've got this chain where the root has intermediate certificates, and those intermediate CAs actually issue end entity certificates. So I'll give you a very simple example. Like, imagine that you're trying to connect to bankofamerica.com using your browser. Maybe you like Edge, maybe you like Chrome, but whatever browser you use, all of them work very similarly. Is that when you try and connect to bankofamerica.com, you go and type that website address in your address bar. What the browser does is it tries to connect to bankofamerica.com. So it goes and pings that IP address, and bankofamerica.com sends back a certificate. Now that certificate that it sends back is an end entity certificate, the top left one in this diagram that I'm showing right now. And so when it sends this back, what it's saying is that, okay, so you have tried to talk to me, you have said hi to me, I'm saying hi back to you, but I'm also sending you my NND certificate so that you can validate that I am indeed bankofamerica.com. So what the client does, or the browser does, it looks at this certificate that Bank of America has sent, and then looks at certain fields in the certificate, and then goes up the chain and basically validates the signature. Now, as you can see in this diagram, we've got the issuer's name and the issuer's signature, and that's common in all these certificates. So what's happening is that the client or the browser is looking at the issuer's signature and then going up the chain, and it keeps going up the chain until it finds a certificate it already trusts. And typically on the internet, clients use root certificates as the trust anchor, where you walk up the chain until that anchor point, and now you realize, like, okay, so this certificate that I've been presented by bankofamerica.com belongs to this chain, which is ultimately signed by this root CA, and I already trust this root CA, right? And that's why root CAs are really important, because root CAs need, they are literally the trust anchors of the public internet as we know it today. So this is a very small recap of how the internet works, and why these certificates are so super essential for the security of our interactions on the internet.
Nice. And so the IoT services are no exception, right? They are services. And as you were mentioning earlier on, like a browser is a client, but devices running software can be client of such services. And it's more and more common that client to cloud and web services are no longer just browsers with a user behind. It could be these devices. So which services from the Azure IoT collection are or beyond actually are affected by these changes? That you're going to give us, the schedule for that migration and what's going on. Right. But which services, in a few words, are affected here?
Excellent question. So basically, what's prompted this migration is a very simple thing. Is that the root CA that Microsoft has been using since 2013, which is the Baltimore Root Cyber Trust root, that is actually expiring on May 12th, 2025. Now, this is nothing out of the ordinary. Root CAs are like regular certificates, except that they are longer lived, and that eventually, like everything, root certificates also expire or die. So this is the expiration of this particular root certificate, and which basically means that once this root expires, it's game over. Which means that there's no way that anybody in the world, including the people or the company that created this root, there's no one that can extend the lifetime of this root any longer than the date that is mentioned or highlighted in this slide. So basically, this root is expiring, right? Which means that everybody who utilizes this root or this chain of certificates that belong to this root, that chain has to go away and has to be replaced by something else. So what Azure has done.
And Ramit, once again, before we go into the next one, so IoT Hub, I just really wanted to have this Baltimore Root cert right now is used by which services?
So it's being used by all device-facing services of Azure IoT,
Okay.
which means that it's being used by IoT Hub, by DPS, by Central, but it's also being used by partner services of Azure IoT, in particular Azure Storage,
Mhm.
which is being used by IoT devices for
Okay.
something called file upload.
Okay. So what's going to happen? Tell us.
So what happened is that in 2020, there was a compliance incident that happened related to this route, wherein basically an organization that oversees TLS and certificates for the public internet, it's called the Certificate Authority in Browser Forum. They deemed certain intermediate CAs of the Baltimore Cyber Trust route to be non-compliant. Now, I'm not going to bore anyone with the details of that particular incident, but that happened on July 1st of 2020. And all 4 ICAs that Microsoft had from the Baltimore Cyber Trust route were deemed to be non-compliant. So they had to change immediately. So what Azure decided is that since they knew that they had to move off the Baltimore route in any case because it was expiring, they decided to sort of use that as an opportunity to go ahead and migrate most of Azure services to the new route which Azure was decided to use, which is the DigiCert Global G2 route. So as of July 1st, 2020, after this incident happened, basically all 4 of the Baltimore ICAs were replaced by the DigiCert Global G2 route, which has 4 new ICAs. And those ICAs I have mentioned here, the MS Azure TLS issuing CA 1, 2, 5, and 6. So basically, Azure said, let's go ahead and migrate all our services to the new route and prepare early for the incoming expiration of the Baltimore route. Right. So obviously Azure could do that because most of the clients that interact with regular Azure services are clients that have fully functional operating systems and are clients that are, I like to think of them as traditional computing, devices like,
Mhm.
servers or laptops or desktops or phones. But in the case of Azure IoT, of course, we know that we've got devices all the way from 16-bit MCUs to server racks that are communicating with Azure IoT. Now, when in 2020, when Azure services migrated, there were some Azure IoT services that also migrated, but these were not device-facing services. These were services that applications could use on top of IoT. These are ADT, TSI, MCDP, device catalog, etc.
Yeah. And
So
you were saying that one little thing here about the clients, you were saying that a regular OS like Windows, Mac OS, Linux, they have a cert store, right, that
right,
can be enriched. And so you can push a new cert that will be eventually picked up by the applications and could be
yep.
something somewhat dynamic or quote unquote easy to do versus devices that might run on a real-time operating system that don't have this notion of a cert store, and basically you would have to refresh the device to have this new cert and recognize the signature here. So that's the main difference, right?
Right, exactly. So the major difference is that for anything that has an operating system, the operating system does a lot of heavy lifting on
Mhm.
behalf of you, of the operator. And so the operating system actually, in the case of this particular scenario, actually keeps the trusted routes up to date as long as your operating system updates are turned on. So if you've got automatic updates switched on, then the operating system will transparently, without you even knowing, continuously update your trusted certificates on your device, so
Mhm.
that you never have a situation where you're trying to interact with something on the internet
Got it.
and you don't trust it, even though it has a legitimate certificate.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
yeah, so that's the main difference between small devices that don't have OSs and these other traditional computing devices. Now, when Azure decides to do all of this in 2020, of course, IoT, as being a citizen of Azure, we had to make a choice, and we obviously realized that our clients are not the same as most of Azure's clients, in that our devices do not have the luxury of having this this heavy lifting done by an operating system for a lot of the cases. Of course, there are some devices that do have OSs running, and for them probably the migration is a little easier. But for MCU class of devices, yeah, it was something that we knew that device manufacturers and device builders would require a lot of time for them to go understand this entire change, because it's not something they've interacted or done this before, but also to go hunt for their devices, figure out a way to update it, and make sure that existing devices that consumers or the end users are using do not break in the process.
So hence the heads up. It's like, hey, it's 2023 beginning. The Baltimore Root cert will expire in 25. We'll talk about those timelines, but it's time to take action or to consider what the plans are, right?
Absolutely. So, like I said, that in 2020, as Azure was going down this path, Azure IoT decided to, listen to, what our customers were saying, that they needed more time and they needed to understand this landscape, where their devices were deployed, their fleets, and figure out a way to update. So we knew that this would take some time. So what we decided to do is that we decided to not migrate with the rest of Azure, take a couple of years, allow our customers to update, and then eventually join Azure in their new chain, which is the DigiCert Global G2 chain. In fact, what our future looks like for IoT Hub and DPS particularly is that once we migrate, the new ICA that we will have will be MSFT RS256CA. If you've got a keen eye and you've been noticing, this ICA is not the same one that Azure used, which was MS Azure TLS issuing CA1256. That is because we've got our own ICA to facilitate IoT device connectivity. The ICAs that Azure is using uses a SHA-384 signature, and we've got our very own SHA-256 based ICA to make sure that devices that cannot compute SHA-384 continue connecting successfully to Azure IoT in the future. So this is what the world will look like for IoT Hub and DPS and IoT Central. Under the covers is that you will see, once the migration finishes, you will see that the chain that the server presents every time you connect to Azure IoT will look like this, where the root will be G2 and the intermediate will be this particular certificate authority, the MSFT RS256CA. So these changes are going to start in February of 2023, and I'm going to give sort of a detailed look into the schedule shortly. But all in all, one thing that I've tried to highlight every time I've come on this show, Olivier, is that through the journey of this migration, what we've learned is that while updates are fairly common and something that we don't think about when it comes to our phones and our laptops, in the case of embedded and IoT devices, it's something that we must really, really take seriously, because it's a new world where we're connecting devices that never used to connect to the public internet before. We are connecting them like wildfire. Like every single device that you thought was, disconnected is suddenly getting a Wi-Fi chip and is suddenly connecting to the internet. And that poses a problem, right? Because when you do something like this, you have to ensure that the connectivity portion is secure, and that relies on certificates. And certificates on the internet expire, they get compromised, they get revoked. It's a messy world on the internet. So having a mechanism for devices, IoT devices in particular, to get updated so that they don't have manual intervention required in cases like this is of supreme importance. And I can't state that enough. So I have this note even on this slide that says that this requires automatic update mechanism for future IC and root CA changes. Yeah. If you're a customer who's listening to me and have not made the changes on your device yet, if you're planning to make it in the next month or two, please go ahead and try and put in this update mechanism so that you're future proofed, so that in the future, if anything happens and you need to quickly recover, you have that already built in for your device.
Okay. And as a matter of fact, Ramit, sorry, but we do have solutions, and because that's a big focus, so it's not just us, Microsoft, allowing to update your devices through the device update for IoT Hub service or feature. There are plenty of solutions out there from partners, and so
Mhm.
yeah, definitely top of mind. Have devices that can update. If you want to have an integrated solution, device update for IoT Hub is pretty powerful, and you should take a look at other episodes that we have about it. It's critical. It's problematic for those who have not needed that in the past, as you were saying, Remit, like not all devices were connected, and once
Mhm.
a device works, very often real-time systems, they don't need updates because they just work, right? And they can do that one task they are designed for the next 20 years. If it works, right? So
Yep.
why changing? Connectivity becomes the culprit here for having to update because of these risks in that connectivity protection or safety. So sorry for the interruption. Let's continue with the timeline here.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great call out that the world of IoT is ridden with security considerations, and I mean a simple search on the search engine of your choice will tell you how ridden IoT is with compromises,
Yeah,
and why we need to take security that seriously. So
exactly.
with that, I wanted to give you guys a quick peek into what our migration schedule has looked like. We made this announcement about this migration back in 2021. In fact, actually, we made the announcement in May of 2020. If you remember, Olivier, we spoke in 2020 as well. Uh,
Yeah,
but but that was because we were migrating intermediate CAs when Azure was migrating root CAs. But we knew that we had to do this root migration, and that was announced last year, or in fact, it's 2023 today, so about a year and a half ago. And basically, what we're going to do is on Feb 15th next month, we are going to start the IoT Hub migration. What is expected from our customers by Feb 15th is that their devices should be ready for this transition, which means that they need to have the G2 root added to their devices root store, or where however they store their trusted certificates on their devices. And I want to highlight that I said added and not appended or any other word. It needs to be added because we want the Baltimore root to remain during the period of this transition.
right.
So yeah, so the G2 root must be added, and then customers should validate after adding the G2 root that the devices still work. And for that, we have test endpoints available for customers to test against to ensure that devices are working as expected. And we plan to do the IoT Hub migration very, very slowly over an 8-month period between Feb 15th and October 15th. And during this period, we're going to roll out region by region, scale unit by scale unit, because we understand that sometimes some things can get missed. And when things get missed, we want to make sure that our customers do not break for a long time. So we want to be able to roll back customers in case something breaks, help them fix it, and then move forward, which is why we want to do this migration very intentionally, very carefully, with the goal being that every customer comes out on the other side without having any major outages in their IoT
Yeah,
solutions.
yeah. And
Right.
you
So
you
on.
kind of mentioned that, Remit, but customers will be able to test that, right? They will be able,
Mhm.
in that migration period, they'll be able to change their code on a device, test that the change works, and then before going to production, very often, and eventually can revert that. Correct?
That is correct. That is correct. In fact, I'm going to talk about all the options customers have in case that they are not quite ready yet in
Okay.
later slides. But that is exactly the point, that we understand that there are certain customers who might who have large deployments of devices across the
Yeah.
world, who might not necessarily know if all devices are updated or ready for the transition yet. So we've got solutions for all of these cases, and I'll talk
Okay.
about it in the coming slides. So on
Let's go
October
through
15th,
that.
yeah, so October 15, 2023 is when IoT Hub migration should end. And then we've got 3 months of a freeze period. Typically, we do have that yearly where we don't deploy any breaking changes during the holiday period, etc. And then in Jan 15th next year, 2024, is when DPS will begin its migration. And that's a very short migration, primarily because DPS has a the way DPS is architected is that it has a single shared global endpoint. So
Mhm.
obviously, it's sort of like a switchover date per region, as opposed to something that we can do per hub or per customer. DPS will take about a month to migrate, and we expect that in this 1 year timeline from Feb 15th this year to Feb 15th of 2024, by the end of this, we will be completely off of Baltimore Root, and we will be on G2 exclusively for devices connecting to Azure IoT.
Okay, cool. That's pretty detailed and clear timeline here. So you mentioned that you would share some insights into if you're not ready as a customer because you cannot update your device or whatnot. So what's going on here?
Absolutely. So, first of all, first things first was validation, right? Like we
Mhm.
understood that customers, even once they put the G2 root in their devices, they will want a way to test it before deploying this new certificate in all their devices and putting this in a production solution. So, what we did is we in our Canary environment, we facilitated 2 test endpoints with the goal that devices should be able to just connect to that endpoint and validate the handshake between the server and the client. That's all the validation endpoints are intended to facilitate. They are not meant for those devices to go ahead and connect and send telemetry, but they will do is just validate whether the new that certificate that the server is sending is recognized by the device. That's all, because that's literally all the change that this migration is going to introduce for devices.
Okay.
So that's one way of doing it, validation using these validation endpoints. Details are obviously provided in our blog, in our MS Learn documentation, which also I have links to at the end of this deck. But that is one way of doing this validation. Now, another way of doing this validation is we released about a month and a half ago. We released a self migration toggle. This is in the portal itself. And what this allows you to do is that once you added the G2 root to your device, you can actually manually migrate your IoT hub yourself, which we thought was a very interesting scenario for a lot of customers where they are really sensitive to downtime and they wanted
Mhm.
to migrate on their own schedule. So we've given you guys this option wherein that once you add the G2 root, you can go to your IoT hub and you can go and just with a simple click of a button migrate that hub. Now, once
Yeah.
you click that migrate button, obviously we will ask you for confirmation multiple times to make sure that you guys are ready, indeed ready. Once you click that migrate button, what we've allowed you to see in that is a graphic that shows you the number of devices that were connecting to your hub at that time prior to migration. You will see all those devices drop connections, and then
Mhm.
slowly, in a period of 15 to 45 minutes, you will see all those devices reconnect to that IoT hub, as long as all those devices have the G2 root. Now, it's possible that within this process, you discover that some percentage of your devices are not reconnecting. Well,
Mhm.
that's your validation right there, because now you know the offending devices. You can go and remediate, add the G2 root in, and do this process again. So yes, we have actually in this tool allowed you to do two-way migration. You can go from Baltimore to G2, check everything is works, and if something does not work or some devices do not reconnect, you can go back to Baltimore, figure out what went wrong, remediate, and come back and migrate yourself. So this looks like this. In the portal, you can simply go to your IoT hub blade, go to certificates, and the TLS certificate section, or the tab in that particular section, and we've got a migrate to DigiCert Global G2 button. Go ahead, hit it, and it'll take you through a series of confirmations, at the end of which it'll migrate your hub. And then right at the end of that workflow, we will have another similar button that says revert back to Baltimore in case you need to. So again, this self migration toggle, or this button that we've sort of introduced in the portal. There's also a CLI command line as well available for those folks who want to use it. But this tool essentially allows you to do a manual migration as well as test that all your devices are indeed updated with the G2 root.
Love it. And it's pretty straightforward. I like it.
Yep. Right. So one of the things that while we were thinking about this is right, throughout 2020 2021, as customers have been made aware of the incoming migration, one of the things we've heard is a lot of customers are finding it hard to update their devices in time, and that therefore, in fact, this migration schedule has changed twice already. We were supposed to start in June 2022 and end by October 2022. But now we've sort of extended this time period by 6 months, and we still recognize that there might be still customers who need just a little bit of more time,
Mhm.
and for that we have a solution as well. We've got a form that customers can fill up and pick from any one of these 7 dates where they can basically request for an extension to the migration. What this will do is basically it'll tell us the hubs that you want postponed in terms of the migration, and whatever date you pick, we will start the migration of those hubs on that date. As you can see, the last date that you can pick is September 15th, because our migration has to end on October 15th. So we want that 1 month to migrate all these leftover hubs that have not been migrated yet. So the process is super simple. You just fill this form out and you email us on at iotcaupdates@microsoft.com, and telling us that you filled the form and what your company name is, and we will basically put all these hubs in an allow list, ensuring that they are not migrated as your region gets migrated during our regular rollouts, as I had shown in the diagram depicting the schedule. So this is something that we have communicated with all our customers in December. If you're an existing Azure IoT customer watching this, you probably would have gotten an email from us. You probably have seen a banner in the Azure IoT Hub portal, Blade. You probably have a service health notification as well. So there are lots of channels that we've used to sort of communicate with you guys. But
Yep.
this is yet another channel that I'm using to make sure that you guys know about this, that there is a way for you to request an extension to this migration, modulo that the options are limited, because we do definitely need to be off. IoT Hub needs to be off Baltimore by October 15th.
Awesome. So Ramit, this is a very detailed description here. We also have your blog post down here with even more details and all the links and so on. And I think we're going above and beyond to make sure that customers don't get the devices disconnected. But there is an action to be taken here in order to stay compliant, stay secure, and actually a good opportunity to implement device update mechanisms. And
Yep.
so that's something that is for the best. But we're here to help the customers going through all of that. And as you mentioned on the last part, even if you're not ready, if you can today, let us know, and we'll work together on that. Make sure that you are not left behind, and that your devices can still connect and your solutions can still work. So awesome,
Yep.
Ramit. Any last
Absolutely.
word from you?
So yeah, I mean, I just the last thing I wanted to touch on is exactly just piggybacking on what you said, is that our intention really with this migration, and the reason why we postponed it, why we've been interacting with customers via email, etc., is that we really want this migration to be smooth for our customers. We really want our customers to not face any large scale outage or any problems due to this migration. So for that purpose, we also have a support story where you could go into the portal and open a support request for any reason related to this migration. Perhaps you need more time, or perhaps you need some expertise with regard to some portion of this migration. Perhaps you just need to talk about your IoT solution and what it means for root update going forward, and whether you've got a root update solution already and you want us to take a look. Any reason for related to this migration, you can open a support request, and our support teams will get back to you, and will try their level best to help you out. In fact, if you're having trouble with the validation endpoints and you need to do a more detailed test, you can also use this support request process to go ahead and get some help, and our support team will of course help you guys out. Yeah, these are the resources that you mentioned. We've got a blog. We've got an MS Learn documentation, and we've got this show that will be published soon. And for anything at all, if you guys wish to talk to the team that's sort of behind the scenes driving this migration, you can email us at our alias that is given here. And yeah, that's about it. I'm just glad that I'm able to talk to you guys through this forum, and I really hope that between us and you guys, we are able to partner up and facilitate a really smooth migration for all of our Azure IoT customers.
I'm sure it will be. Ramit, thanks a lot for your time today. Everyone, go check it out on the blog post and learn more about what you need to do on your devices, in your apps, in order to make sure that you have this migration taken care of and control. This is something that doesn't happen often. We don't expecting such big changes, as you mentioned at the beginning, Ramit, to happen anytime soon. But this is happening, and this is a moment to work together and make sure that everyone is safe and secure. Thanks, Ramit, again. Thanks, everyone, for watching. See you soon on the IoT Show. Bye.